Welcome to the Creative Plan Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews of items, and convention panels, and other exciting things that we run into from time to time. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion to Ragnarok story, and To the Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and rpgpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
The mics are not on.
They're not. So we just have to speak up through the mask.
Yeah.
Speak up, not through the mask. My name is Cynthia Ward. I write fiction, occasional nonfiction. My most recent book is The Adventure of the Golden Woman, which is the final volume of the Bloodthirsty Agents from Wall Street. The Thesis Shell, I wrote Writing the Other Practical Approach, which is a writing guide for writing races, religions, genders, and other significant categories that are different from your own.
I bought that.
Oh, thank you.
I'm David Lee Summers, and by night I operate telescopes up at Kitt Peak National Observatory, and my day job is actually writing science fiction and fantasy. And my most recent book is Breaking the Code, which is out from eSpec Books, just came out earlier this year, and it's basically about it's set during the early days of World War II, and it's about a skinwalker interfering with Marines trying to recruit Navajo code talkers. And
That sounds interesting.
Sounds really cool.
Thanks. And also a comic book experiment, Guinevere and the Stranger, which I have at our dealer's table in there, which is basically an adapted chapter of my comic book, or my novel, Dragon's Fall, Rise of the Scarlet Order Vampires. So it's basically one of those chapters redone. And of course, I've been writing and publishing for about 20 some years, own Hattersor Productions, and have a number of books that we've published, both of my own and of other people at our table in the dealer's room. And I would say, as far as the topic of this panel, it's this panel's topic is the whole reason I'm more of a plotter than a pantser, is figuring out how I want to put in enough complications to get my heroes through a problem, but without, and give my heroes enough abilities without writing myself into a corner, basically.
And happy birthday.
Thank you. I've been outed.
It's Facebook's fault.
Yes.
Today?
It is.
Oh, birthday.
Thank you.
Is Monday.
Happy birthday.
Fiction writers have November birthdays.
Exactly.
Mine was mine was last Monday.
Oh, no. Okay. All right.
And the whole town.
Baby, candles on your cake burn like cities in your wake.
Yes.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
The birthday dirge. I'm Catherine Wells, and if you've been to TusCon before, you've probably seen me here. I've been publishing for about 30 years now. That's a little scary. Novels and short stories and novellas, and if you're an analog reader, you may have seen in the March-April issue, and the name goes right out of my, don't you? Invasive Species, my novella that ran earlier this year. So if you are an analog subscriber and that ballot comes around for, remember me, please, have a look. And I also have a novel that theoretically is coming out next year, and I'm working with a small publisher, and I'm not sure their editorial staff is kind of up to my standards, so we'll see where that goes. Anyway, that's me.
My name is Bruce Davis. I write fantasy and science fiction. Most of my work is available from Brick Cave Media. Brickcave.media is the website. My current work is Lord of the Rings meets Law and Order. The third book in the Magic Law series, hopefully, will be out in the spring. That's Silver Magic. Platinum Magic and Gold Magic are already out. That's my night job. My day job is as a trauma surgeon and critical care surgeon at a level 1 trauma center in Scottsdale. I'm also a amateur historian. My path to medicine was very odd. I have a minor in history from university and spent a lot of time with it. So I will be talking later today about medical history and why the Roman legionaries got better care than Civil War soldiers did. An interesting topic for those who want to write realistic injuries for your sword and sorcery hero. So, without further ado, all right, I'll take it. So the whole idea here is, how do we get our heroes in trouble and then get them out of trouble in a realistic manner? And I guess I'll take off with that. I'm an inveterate pantser, Dave, so I frequently write myself into corners.
The question is, how do you write yourself out?
Well, and that's a good question. I think that when we're writing, particularly when we're writing the kind of novels that most of us do, there's a lot of complications and action that's going on. That's what makes it interesting. Those things can be physical. They can be mental challenges. I think if you're going to get your hero out of trouble in a realistic manner, you need to do a good job with your foreshadowing. And if people don't know what that is, that's where you build into the story at the beginning, that your hero is actually ex-special forces, which is why he can use all those fancy weapons. Right. Or that your hero's best friend is a powerful magician, that he can call on, but the magician isn't really terribly brave, so the hero has to be brave. Whatever. But you got to set that stuff up. You can't just pull it out of the hat at the very end. I'm not of the school of thought that I know many authors espouse when they're writing these kind of things, that you should put your hero in trouble and then put him in more trouble and then just keep putting him in more trouble. I think that tends to get cartoonish after a while, in my hands anyway. Perhaps if you're a plotter, you can plot that well. I tend to go overboard with that, write 1,500 words and say, oh, this is all crap, I gotta go back and start over. But that's my take on it. I think the key to being realistic and getting heroes out of trouble is building into the story the little hints and the little clues that this ability is going to be available. Or, was it Tolstoy or somebody who said, if you describe a room with a shotgun on the mantelpiece, somebody better get shot by the 4th page.
Chekhov's law, I think.
Yeah, something like that. I was one of the Russian writers. I can never remember.
If there's a rifle over the mantelpiece, someone better get shot by the second act.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If someone's going to get shot, it better have that thing on the mantelpiece
Right,
before.
yes, it works that way too. Yeah. I kind of flow back and forth between pantser and plotter. But I like to have an outline, but it's usually very brief. It's less than a page. I like to know where I'm headed generally, and then I have to develop a problem for the hero. First, you have to have a problem, and then I may not always know how he's going to solve it when I start. And part of the process of exploring, well, we could do it this way, or we could do it that way, or we could go here. Sometimes the hero has to go down all of those avenues to find the solution. And sometimes I don't know what the solution is going to be till I get there. Because I start with an idea of who the hero is, but then the character develops and kind of takes over. And then certain ideas become more natural for him or her, And certain ones are like, no, she'd look at that and go, no, that's not it. So I really often don't know till I get there, and then a lot of times I have to go back to the beginning and fix
put that little bit in.
Put that foreshadowing, and I have to plant this here and plant that there, and make. Oh, and you know, it would be better if this character actually had a PhD in whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that, it struck a chord with me because my last editor at Lakis Publishing did just kind of what you said, Bruce, of you have to have, more trouble and, just keep building it up. And she kept saying, well, you've got this chapter here that's kind of, in my horror novel, The Astronomer's Crypt, and she said, you've got this chapter here that's kind of light and, it's just character moments and things. And it's like, I think we should really build up the action here. And I was like, have you ever read Stephen King? The somewhat, known horror writer, who has a little bit of a following. That's exactly. Yeah, that's exactly, the kind of thing that he does. Is the reason that you care about the trouble that they've fallen into is because you actually care about the characters. He does moments where you build up and you get to know these people and you get to know them as people. And I think that is an important and underrated part of the whole process of writing science fiction, fantasy. And it's actually, I think, a big part of making, we talk about willing suspension of disbelief a lot in science fiction and fantasy. And I think that's one of the ways you build that is to see, yes, maybe this is the brave, stalwart captain of a starship traveling, wherever. But, he still likes a good, whiskey and, maybe likes a good book or whatever. We get to know him and can relate to that person. And that goes a long way to building that, wanting to follow and see them solve whatever problem we've written them into.
Like he likes his Earl Grey.
Yeah.
Just a quick side note before we let Cynthia have her crack at this, and that is that beware of people who tell you that there is a formula or a set of rules for how to write a novel. That you must always do this, you must always say, you must never do that, because there are exceptions to every rule. Know the rules, know when to break them. Okay.
All right. Right. Well, the thing you're talking about, but if you're writing a very short story with breakneck action, you're going to just reveal character through the action. But the longer the piece gets, you would not sit through a symphony as long as Beethoven's symphony. There were not changes of pace because it would be exhausting, and it wouldn't matter that it was brilliant. The things you're talking about, you guys are talking about with nothing. Or people proposing one thing after another. This is part of it. The other part is that there are a couple different ways to go forward with your plot, your story, your novel. And there are two things you should do, but you shouldn't only do one side. One is, so as you go along, you're either telling your character no, or you're telling your character yes, but. So you don't say no all the way, because I stopped reading books where it's just no. And you don't say just yes. yes, because that's the most boring story of all, where, the spoiled brat princess misplaces her crown jewel and she finds them on page 3 because there were no obstacles like that. So those are ways to get around the problem that you talk about. But my main observation is that plot is character, so what happens the problems they get into and things they try and the way they finally fix it or fail is inherent in the character. Like, if you open a story and it's about, a Conan the Barbarian type mercenary, and then the story is about how the farmer needs to get some seed after the drought, there's a logical disconnect if Conan is suddenly now the only one worried about that. He might help the farmer.
Trivial side quest.
Plot and character are the same thing in that regard.
I think when we're talking about the kind of complications we're introducing. They don't have to be the bad guy doing something or the environment doing something. They can be part of that character. So the character knows that he has to do something, but his own character is such that he is rebelling against that. You know, he's the bad guy who's got to do something good, or the good guy who's got to sacrifice somebody to, you know, for the greater good. I mean, those are kind of cliche things, but you can build into the character that sense of conflict that the surface event may not be that significant, but if you've developed your character in such a way, it may have tremendous significance for him, and that actually becomes a big part of the problem solving as well. And I think that's why, to both your points, character has to be primary in the story if you're writing, I think even a short story, it's just how you reveal character. I'm character driven in all of my writing. There's a lot of action, but if you're a pantser like me, that means you write by the seat of your pants. You don't have an outline and a plot. I know authors who'll do a 30,000 word outline for a 80,000 word novel, and it's like, just write the novel. But you've got to start with character before you can even get into the rest of that stuff. I have to like my character if I'm going to put him in trouble. Otherwise, I just don't care about him. I'll just spin off.
I have the best source of insight where you're talking about who among us is not their own worst enemy when it comes to writing. Like, I am, sure. I'm totally my own worst enemy. My bad habits, my distractions, my character flaws.
That's what's the story. If you really want to, if you really want to have a nice clean house, give a writer a deadline in 2 days.
Well, all this being said, there is something to be said for the kind of trope that you have your character your character has a problem, and he does something to fix it and makes it worse, and then has to go. So that let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to just over and over and over and over again, but trying to fix the problem, and either because the solution is in error or because there's something in the character's personality that oh, well, this is simple, I'll just do this, oops. Sometimes that's then what makes the situation worse, and you go on from there. So they do have to have obstacles. It's not the what is that, the A-team motif, where first you describe the problem, what you're gonna do, then you tell the others what you're gonna do, and then you go out and do it. It's like, okay, but
that's why I never watched it.
Yeah, I didn't either, but I've heard that said of it. So anyway, you need to have, because as we go through life, we don't solve all our problems right off the bat. We make mistakes. So to make your character realistic, you can't just easily say, oh, I don't need to fix that. I'm working on a novel right now where I just love this character. I've got like 3 other unsold novels on the same character, and this is going to be the final one in the set. And I've grown to really love him. And the first draft I went through, and here's the problem. Oh, well, here's the solution. And like, that's not going to work. We've got to. I'm so caught up with all the other things going on that particular problem that's been kind of theoretically driving the course of the novel. And he just steps into the situation and says, oh, well, here's your...
No, that's a very short novel.
At this moment it is, and that's another part of the problem. So I need to go back into it now and say, okay, what's going to screw up here? That kind
of departing a little bit from this, but not really. What's always been hard for me. And what is also interesting is how much of the stuff that your character doesn't know you can get in and still stay within whatever point of view you're writing from. Because sometimes if this problem, like, here's the solution, oops. Well, why is it an oops? It seemed like a good idea. You've got to kind of build in something either ahead of time or some explanation for why that was an oops.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, it frustrates me when I read other stuff where the character does, here's the solution, oops. Well, that oops came out of the blue. Why was that a problem? You never hinted that was a problem. It feels like a cheat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you
And
can
I think
certainly.
the tension then is to how to build in that background in whatever world you've made so that, yeah, it looks like a good idea at the time, but, oh, gee, maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
No, and I think there's a very real world approach to this, which is that sometimes there are 2 or 3 apparent solutions to something, of which 1 or 2 might be better than a third one. But for one reason or another, this one over here looks like the right idea. It may be the obvious solution,
Right.
but it might have unintended consequences. And you can certainly, and you can have unreliable friends too, which lead you to, which might have their own motivations for
Or
it.
your own character inclines you to, well, we have this problem. Hulk smash. Like the audience, unless they're very, very unsophisticated again, indeed are not going to be going, oh yeah, Hulk smash will definitely work.
Yeah.
We just had 4 years of that governance and it didn't work.
Yes.
I have, in my novels, there are 2 main characters, you could argue, and one is much younger than the other because they're both different species of vampires, basically. And the older one has seen everything, and she will say, the younger one is more like, I'm going to pick up a gun and just go right through the problems. The older one is like, well, I don't think that will work, or have you considered? But the younger one has not had the experience, this particular experience. So we've gone through this scenario, and this is based on me throughout my entire life. Somebody is like, well, that probably won't work that well. Oh, sure it will, I say with all the confidence, completely ignoramus. And so, but the older vampire also knows the more she meddles, the worse it gets. Sometimes people have to make their own mistakes. So some of her mistakes have incredibly bad consequences, fatal consequences. So yeah, your own nature, not everybody approaches things, the Hulk smash, ignorant Hulk smash thing, but you can have friends, sidekicks, coworkers or whatever, who are like, are you sure about that? And then at least the reader is tipped off.
Maybe that's not.
There's something ahead to be considered, even if the character either won't consider it or is not sufficiently, we do this all the time, not weighing the odds correctly because we don't know what they are and we misjudge them.
Or you have imperfect information.
Or you're lacking information.
Right.
There's always 2 complicating things up, and I'm finding this more and more in my own life as I go on and doing stuff. Is the like for want of a nail kind of problems, or the Elijah, there's a hole in my bucket kind of thing. Is that I go to do something. Oh wait, I have to go do something else first, and then I go to do that. Oh no, this is going to require me to do this first, and it's like, and you get this long chain, and you have to keep track of it, and you work your way back. Yeah.
And
My
that can take-
garage is full of tools that were bought for one specific thing that has never arisen again.
I've had entire days like I'm going to print out a bet everybody hears. I'm going to print out a page. Oh, there's no ink.
No, yeah.
Oh, the store doesn't have any ink. Oh, the power would. I mean, like you need one step forward, but you have 50 back.
Exactly.
That's the kind of thing, though, that when you're writing that, can either add to your tension or become comedic relief sometimes.
Yeah.
This is,
And I kind of enjoy doing that with my characters. If I feel like we need to kind of break this deadly serious thing, you know, maybe not even a main character, a side character. Like, you know, I need to fix the whole. Oh, I don't have a. Oh, I got to get this. Oh, I got, and we're spending a chapter running around, you know, while everyone else is. But we got to solve the problem.
Right, just to keep time, because like, hey.
this is actually, you're describing a screwball comedy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I love
It's
screwball
just a
comedies.
series
They're-
of frustrations. And
Right. Exasperations, yes.
a really good example of that I read recently, which is not science fiction, but is a romantic comedy / mystery crime. It's Dial A for Aunties.
What was that?
Dial A for Aunties. This woman accidentally kills her blind date. And the solution that her mom and aunties propose is, well, they need to hide the body because they have a wedding to throw. So almost the entire plot is we have to get rid of the body. Yeah, I mean, it was an accident, but we don't want the authorities. And it's just like,
Because the authorities show up, everything is right.
it's just, it's, if you enjoy like a screwball comedy, I guess it's being made in a movie, which doesn't surprise me a bit, but that is a really expert take on that kind of plot where every time you want to fix the problem, it becomes more and more complicated. Of course, the body is not static. It's starting to rot.
Yeah.
And they're stuck on an island for the wedding. Surrounded by people.
And the whole thing keeps compounding.
The doctor thinks that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very,
Yeah.
Yes.
Still,
Picking up on something Cynthia was saying, another way you can complicate this is the experienced character has experience, absolutely, but it's the wrong experience for the problem. But they're trying to apply that experience where it just makes sense.
when your only tool is a hammer, everything is a nail.
Yeah, exactly. That, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do the rest of you go about building those things in when you're starting, say, a new character? You've got a series, you've got an established set of characters, you know what they are. But when you're starting out new, you know, I've always found it difficult if I want a particular skill set. You know, it's easy to say, oh, he did this before. But that's just kind of an info dump that's like, what does that have to do with how I've set this up and started the novel? So how quickly do you build those things in? Because you know you're going to need the skills. And we've said we have to foreshadow it. But I think part of the skill in doing that is introducing those things in a way that it doesn't seem jarring.
yeah. To take an example from a story I'm working on right now, without giving away the whole plot, the main character, as part of the solution to the problem, is going to need a supply of mice. Now, first of all, okay, she is a researcher and she is running tests on the food on this new planet, on the vegetation on this new planet, to make sure that it's not toxic to humans, right? So she has a supply of mice to test them. Okay. What's the problem with having mice? Well, the native race on this planet is very reluctant to allow anything from that's not native onto their planet. They just use that whole invasive species thing. So they get very upset. So one of the first encounters is, mice? You have mice? You can't have mice. No, it's okay. Your elders have approved me to have the mice for testing my food before I eat it. Oh, okay. So, what is one of the first conflicts turns out then to be part of the ultimate solution.
Right.
Now, one of the things I do, and it's interesting the way you phrased the question about characters that you haven't met before, because I'm kind of a big believer in the fix-up novel, starting with some short stories and starting to put them together. And a lot of times part of it is I just get to know my characters through having written them in short form before I really start writing them as a novel. And so I kind of get to know what their weaknesses are. You know, they solve this problem that they can solve in 5,000 or 6,000 words, and I've kind of gotten to know them. And so when I go to put them into a novel, it becomes kind of, okay, I know where their weaknesses lie. I know what things I'm going to throw at them to make that kind of an interesting thing. Now, I have done one novel where I didn't start that way. And I think I did that by a lot of the characters were, you know, they weren't like exact people I knew, but I built them on templates of types of people I knew. And I think, again, it's sort of knowing where the real weaknesses, limitations of certain people, and throwing people with certain skill sets together that might or might not, some of them might be able to solve this, and then you eliminate someone who may have the most important skill set of all, and then everyone else has to figure it out at that point. So.
Just a thought here in terms of, you know, how do you give your character these problems that they then have to solve them, and not too easily. One of the key elements that a writer uses in this process is the antagonist. So a person who is actively trying to interfere with what the main character is trying to do. So that's one method of having obstacles, roadblocks, is to have a really good antagonist, a really good believable antagonist who isn't Snidely Whiplash with it, you know, and sometimes the antagonist can actually be a sympathetic character.
Oh, I think they have to be.
Yeah, that's.
If I can interrupt, and I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I think the best antagonists are those that are completely sympathetic. I mean, no one is the villain of their own story. And so while their motivation, their methods may be things that you might abhor, you have to make their motivation something that someone can point to and say, well, yeah, I can see why you would want to do something about that. What you're doing may not be the right thing, but you know, it's a solution to your problem. Because the antagonist has a problem too that they're trying to solve, just like your character.
And in fact, I think one of the most fun sets of problems I ever had in a story was having two sets of people that were essentially aligned trying to solve the same problem with two different approaches to it. And and it becomes kind of a competition to who solves the problem. And you know, the outcome might be good in both cases, but it's not necessarily going to be good for the other side, depending on who solves it first.
And they might be actively trying to interfere with each other, so I get it done first.
And I've even seen that kind of thing ratcheted up even higher, that they used to be friends.
Yeah.
Or even relatives, and now are bitter enemies because of this split in this approach to this problem.
I heard an interesting take on antagonists, and learning this made me able to finish the Lucy Harper book, which was that the antagonist has the same goal as the protagonist.
Okay.
And not only that, but in many ways they are a mirror of each other. And then I realized that in my Lucy Harper books, the antagonist was not the villain. The antagonist, more often than not, was the woman she loved. And so it can be very easy to assume that the villain is the antagonist, and frequently the villain is the antagonist. But this is described in the book Take Off Your Pants, which is a guide for pantsers to become plotters. I forget the writer's exact name. I know everybody laughs, and as intended, but it's a very good book. I reread it several times in a row. Then I got out several stories I'd never been able to solve. I rewrote them and I sold them. Because I was able to and fix the Lucy Harker novellas that weren't working. Because there was other good advice in there. It's not just the idea that the antagonist is a mirror image. I'm sure if we thought about it, we'd think movies and books were in fact that was going on. I mean, in Star Wars, Darth Vader is so much the opposite of Luke Skywalker. He's his dad. Yeah.
Right.
So
Actually, that was kind of what.
Sorry, I just was another example of people who are kind of mirrors in each other's warriors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, you brought up the points, and yet I was just, when you were talking about that with Darth Vader, I mean, he just seems so dastardly. But I was wondering if you, so what you're talking about is kind of answering this question partly, but I want to put this out to all of you, like, you know, you've got the really horrible, black-hearted villains in so many things, but especially Disney movies, I often find. And then I remember reading actually that people who wrote Finding Nemo, one of their goals was to create conflict without having to have that nasty villain. So they used, you know,
Fish are our friends.
So I just, yeah, you know, I mean, it seems like what you all are talking about is even maybe more middle ground, but I wonder if you could talk about that range of some of the problems that the antagonist might face from someone besides a...
Well, there are different ways to structure your problems that don't always involve an antagonist in the sense of a character. A number of adventure novels involve the environment as the antagonist. How do you trek across the Arctic to safety, you know, and what do you encounter on the way? Or it could simply be a social problem. You're an outcast in a society, and how are you going to just get about and live when you're either being hunted or they want to take care of you, but you don't particularly want to be taken care of. So there's a lot of different ways you can structure your obstacles and your problems that don't necessarily involve a character antagonist. I think the key, if you're going to write a character antagonist, though, is not to have the Disney cartoon Blackheart villain without some explanation or motivation for it. Somebody could be completely evil. They just want to watch the world burn. Well, how did they get there? That's the interesting part of it. They weren't born that way. How did they become that? And so that backstory, that if you can build that in, and that's also a bit of a challenge.
Or
I
if
think
they were
makes
born
that
way, maybe their childhood showing that.
Yeah. Well, however you want to do it, there are a number of ways to do that. But that's what makes that totally evil, awful thing believable, number one, and also far more interesting. You know, if it's just Godzilla, you know, rampaging monster, well, monsters just doing what monsters do. You know? It's not good for us, but he's just out there being his best self, you know.
It's essentially just an element of the environment.
Yeah.
We just have to survive it.
Jim.
Along those lines, if you've got kind of an ensemble of characters, and you've got bad guys that range, and men and women that range from a little bit bad to really evil, you can't really give the backstory on all of those characters without turning it back and forth, right?
Well, that's the craft. And yes, you're right. You can't just dump this on them. You know, oh, I'm evil because when I was a child all this happened, and you go off on this long
But then you
tangent.
got 10 characters that are, you know, have these quirks, and you gotta, you know.
I think you don't have to get that detailed. You can build just little things in. The best writers, the writers that I love the best, are able to do that in a couple of sentences. I mean, one of my favorite writers of all time is Elmore Leonard. And he can structure your side character bad guy with 2 sentences. And I'm like, how do you do that? You know, and it's immediately obvious who this person is and how they got there. It's like, 2 sentences, man. Teach me.
Well, I would argue that you don't need to give everybody a backstory either, because I think the Star Wars universe would be a lot better off if we didn't get a 3-movie trilogy devoted to how Darth Vader became bad, because everyone kind of understands in the first 3 movies, the ones released first, I guess it's all confusing number now. People understand that his point is to twirl his mustache and swirl his cape. That he's a Victorian melodrama bad guy, and Hollywood seems to have a current mania for giving you the background story of everybody because you can wring more movies out of it. But a lot of characters, like Superman and Batman, it's useful to know their background, but we don't really need Sam Spade's origin story. You get a very vivid sense of what he's like, how his job might make him that way.
I would argue that Hammett actually does sort of give you his origin story in little tiny bits and pieces, and you structure it yourself. But the character is so well done that you really believe that. I mean, the same is true of Raymond Chandler. And these are some of my favorite authors of all time, because despite Chandler's purple prose, they can take a character and give you a single paragraph. And this is all of a sudden a vivid character. I think in Farewell My Lover, when Chandler is talking about, I forget the main character, his wife, and he uses just a few, she's a knife-edge blonde. Okay? Oh my God. That phrase right there, to me, I don't know about everybody else, to me that is just masterful. And I love that kind of writing. I wish I could emulate it.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point that I was going to get to, that my novels have 5 major characters, protagonists, 4 antagonistic characters. The real antagonist is a set of viruses, to go back to your point about environmental things. But the way I try to solve the backstory problem was to do just what you were describing, drop in nuggets of backstory at the moment where they really contributed. So you didn't have to stop the story and say, okay, now I'm going to give you 3 paragraphs of why this person is this way. Right? Just a little bit here, a little bit there. And over the course of the story, people will get to know that.
And I think that's what we've been talking about all along with getting your hero out of trouble in a believable way. They need this skill set or they need this information, but you've got to, the craft is dropping that in either in bits and pieces or in something that at the time may not seem terribly important, but really is vital.
Sometimes it can be as simple as, how did they say a certain line of dialogue, for instance, because I was thinking in terms of Darth Vader, the reason why Darth Vader is effective in the original trilogy is partly James Earl Jones's masterful acting, where you start, initially he's just cold and mean and cruel, but as we get into Return of the Jedi, he starts having that softening of the voice and everything. You can do that in your writing, where it's like you start revealing the little bit, and it's sometimes just half a line. It might not even be a whole sentence of backstory. You start to realize that the wheels are kicking in the back of this character's mind.
Sometimes you could just state things flat out, but I reread the These Felton recently, and it opens the description of Sam Spade, which is generally like death, right?
Yeah.
But I think the opening line is something like this: Sam Spade looked rather pleasantly like blonde Satan. And you're like, what?
One of my favorite opening lines is John Locke's Dangerous People, and it's from the point of view of a completely immoral assassin. I mean, this guy is he has no redeeming qualities. And it's from his point of view. And the opening line is, I like children and rarely find it necessary to kill them. I mean, as a hook, and as this is this character, that's beautiful.
And just a little bit. Rarely.
Yes, exactly.
Which is actually a good use of, which is why you shouldn't kill all your adverbs.
Exactly.
Sometimes they can be very
very effective. Yeah. And let's not forget the reverse antagonist development, where you start out believing this is one of the good guys,
Right.
and then these little things happen, and then it's revealed finally that they're actually working against what the protagonist is trying to do.
Yes.
I'm going to ask then about essentially the reverse of that. I'm thinking, for example, if you ever saw the show Farscape,
Oh, yes.
each season's villain kind of becomes part of the group next season.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is the more common development, I think, for antagonists, that they start out being really bad, and then as the writer or writers work with the characters, they realize that's going to be boring if they're just going to, they have to develop, they have to grow, and the way to have them grow is to soften and change and become better.
Right. And that goes to the idea that very rarely are people actually just evil.
Right.
They simply have their own motivations and have their own things they want to accomplish. And then if you can bring them in alignment with what you're doing, oh, okay, then we can be friends.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly.
Last Jedi, or was it the? Yeah, I think it was the Last Jedi. Rey and Kylo both fighting against the Empire, and they're like, we're not on the same side anymore now.
When you were talking about how the antagonists have solutions to the problem that both would work, but if they're working, if both of them are working on that solution, then one, it's going to be mixed. The result is going to be mixed. They're both working on the solution at odds with each other. So that could distort the whole solution.
Yep. It sure can.
And that's just another complication to throw in your ear. I mean,
And sometimes that ends up being the end of book one.
Yeah.
well, okay, but it also can be a realistic ending, because real life problems rarely have
The perfect
the
solution.
perfect solution. Every solution has an unintended consequence, or what is it? If we truly compromise, no one is happy.
Exactly.
You know.
But that's how life works. We have to compromise.
But that's the point. If you are writing, I really am not terribly attracted or feel somewhat disappointed when I finish a novel and it's all wrapped up neatly. You know, I prefer either, yes, it's wrapped up neatly, but this character over here was harmed. Or it's all wrapped up neatly, but nobody's really happy with that package. We'd really rather have something else.
Somebody walks off really happy.
And the simple solution or the complex solution that solves everyone's problems leaves me a little bit disappointed at the end of the book. It's like, really?
But as an example, in the novella that ran in Analog this year, Invasive Species, you think the problem when you start is the guy's wife is missing. And then you find out there's actually a different problem. And he's able to solve that problem. And then we find out what happened to his wife. We'll go, oh, he's still got a problem. But that's the end of the story.
the end of the story.
Yeah.
Well, you're describing something that's very common in novels. If you think about it, it's much shorter to get it, harder to do. The characters are going along, and man, it looks like they're never going to get what they're after, and then there's problem changes. What appears to be, or may even be, a new problem rises, and it will actually help them get to their goal, usually, although sometimes they can make it so that there are going to be many sequels instead.
Well, if you're smart, you leave that door open, even though most of my books are standalones. It's all wrapped up. There's, we can pick this part of the story up and do another book out of this.
But that's a point where the complication is such a sticking point, seems so insolvable that the character goes, well, I have to, I'll never win the love of the fair prince, or whatever. But I can rest, well, it's all over. Or I can rescue his crown jewels. And maybe that will be something I can salvage from this. Or I can join the army of the land, or go work in the kitchen, and that turns out to be a door often to getting to the solution that they have given up the conception of the problem, and that opens their ability to see other ways, even though at the time they're pretty despairing or pretty upset.
Okay, we're getting just a few minutes left. Do we have any closing remarks, or you want to tell people where else you're going to be this convention?
I will, at 11 o'clock, we'll be talking about the history of ancient medicine and wound care. Lots of interesting stuff if you're just interested, but I think it's relevant for particularly sword and sorcery type writers. Unless you're invoking magic, if you're going to slice your hero up, know how to take care of it. And that'll be at 11, I think, in room 2. I'm not sure, I have to look it up. And then I'm on one other panel, I think, this evening about your book's turned into a series. How do you maintain that?
And I will be signing autographs at noon. If you have something of mine that you would like me to sign, please feel free to stop by. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock here in the ballroom, we're going to be discussing Don't Start Nothing Won't Be Nothing. Can drama exist when the characters follow all the social mores? That should be an interesting topic.
And at 1 o'clock today, I will be talking about my night job and hunting for planets from 15 with the new spectrograph, which I have advertised on the back of my folder.
When you say hunting planets, I get the picture of Elmer Fudd.
All right, I'm in an autograph session in the area. And then I'm on comics or not in genre, comics or media. Later this afternoon, I believe it would be this ballroom. Anyways, it says ballroom.
Ballroom, this is doing it.
Okay, 4 to 5. And I do want to repeat the recommendation for Take Off Your Pants. The author, I think her name is, I don't know if she was using Libby Harker or Olivia Harker. Libby Harker, okay, but that book has probably been the single most helpful for fixing the kind of fiction that I write, which is kind of a standard approach. But I think even if you're not going to do what the book is focused on, it offers a lot of insight in how to outline by theme or by what you want to accomplish.
Did she do the inside outline as well? Is that her?
I don't know that.
It's the same idea. Is, finding motivation and theme before you start. Right. Know what your novel's going to be about.
Exactly.
Before you start it.
Before you dive in.
Yeah, and a good friend of mine recommends that one highly too, and I can't remember who the author is, but it sounds very simple. It's called The Inside Outline.
That I haven't heard, but I'll look for it. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. And feel free to enjoy our other shows, such as D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Scion Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion hero to Ragnarok story. Thank you for listening.